the first question is, whenever we speak to our advisors, our social media and market advisors, they always tell us, look, you got to make these YouTube videos short and quick because people might lose interest. So I'm going to have to ask you the final question as the first question because we have no guarantee that everyone will watch the entire video. So being that there's going to be a lot of people that see this, and this might be the only opportunity you get to speak to them in your lives. They might never read your book, never watch another video. They might never have anything to do with this subject again. In 3 minutes, I would like for you to each tell us what it is that you want to tell them. In other words, from all the books, the movies, everything, the research you've done, at this moment, if someone is sitting home on YouTube watching this, what do they need to know that will affect them? What do you have to say that's so important that they don't know that is going to affect their lives that they might not understand? If you would each answer that question.
Gosh, well, if it's alphabetical order, I'm sorry I married and hyphenated and start with an A now. But I think it's absolutely critical for people to realize that ultimately, the way in which we treat the earth, the way in which we treat the soil, is really about the respect that we have for ourselves, for our own bodies, and also for our communities. And one of the things that's been the most important revelation for me over the past couple of years while researching and then writing a precautionary tale was to really suddenly realize, as you do so often, I think in writing a book, is you realize that some of your basic assumptions were wrong. And one of the assumptions that I carried with me for a long time and probably also said as an educator was that it was really incumbent upon farmers to be the ones who were helping move us forward with the organic movement. And however you choose to define or understand that word organic, I think that the mistake in many ways is that, in fact, we can't leave that on the shoulders of the farmers, that really it is about communities, and it's the power of what one individual can do to spark a community and then to start a community movement, which in the case, I think, of malts in the small Italian town in the Italian Alps, I think in that case, suddenly we realized that what started there can become an international movement. So never underestimate yourselves. I think that's a big point.
Although we commonly hear that genetically engineered foods are safe and that science says so and that people who have concerns are tantamount to climate change deniers, when we actually look at the facts, it's very clear that the way the scientific establishment has behaved in regard to GMOs is very different than the way it's behaved in regard to climate change. In the latter, in climate change, there's been responsible activity. They've upheld science. In fact, if anything, too many scientists have been overly cautious in the way they present information and make conclusions. In the case of GMOs, important pillars of the scientific community have repeatedly misrepresented facts, pushed out misinformation under the banner of science, attacked science who are actually trying to uphold the standards of science, and unfortunately imposed high-risk foods on unsuspecting populations around the world. If the scientific establishment had actually behaved as scientists when it comes to GMOs, if they had honestly communicated the facts, if they'd upheld the standards of science, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have had to write the book. There would be no genetically engineered crops grown anywhere. That's not an exaggeration. That's why they misrepresent the facts so solidly. And another major agency that has helped in this bamboozlement is the United States Food and Drug Administration. If the FDA alone had merely told the truth and followed U.S. food safety law, then again, there wouldn't be GMOs on the market either, because the FDA has repeatedly covered up the warnings of its own scientists about the abnormal risks of genetically engineered foods, It has lied about the facts, and it is repeatedly and is still breaking U.S. food safety law in order to keep these foods on the market. So don't ever let anybody sell you this bill of goods that if you're afraid of GMOs and somehow you're against science. No, actually, you're on the side that's in favor of science and against the people who claim to be representing it, who are actually degrading it.
It is the same with pesticides. The use of pesticides in our food is based on a scam and not on science. The fact is that not one formulated pesticide that are used by farmers here in the US or any other country, and there are 1,400 approved pesticides, not one has scientific testing for the actual diseases that we suffer from. So in other words, not one has been tested for cancer or heart disease or for birth defects. The governments will say they are scientifically tested, but they don't actually test the product that farmers use. They only test one ingredient in that product. That one ingredient is usually less than 5%. So it is a scientific nonsense to say if you test less than 5% of a cocktail of poisons that it has the same level of toxicity as the whole cocktail. The independent science shows that in most cases, the actual products used on our food are hundreds of % more toxic than the accepted testing by the pesticide authorities. The other thing I want to say is this, is there is not one independent scientific peer-reviewed study showing the safety of one pesticide for our children. But the independent science shows that the smallest levels of pesticides are doing enormous damage to the health of our children. And what type of society permits our children to be damaged by pesticides? For me, this is the worst of child abuse, particularly when we have hundreds of scientific studies showing this abuse, and the pesticide authorities and the pesticide companies are working together to basically continue this abuse. An example of that is an organophosphate called chlorpyrifos that the US EPA was about to ban, but the pesticide companies lobbied the government and got this ban overturned. So these poisons now are damaging our children. Damaging children, we know that it damages their developing brains when they are as a fetus and while they are born. So what we're seeing here is neglect by the pesticide authorities in collusion with the pesticide companies. The fact is that there is no evidence that any pesticide product that farmers use is safe, and all the evidence done by peer-reviewed scientists show it's unsafe. And we need to get that message across. And the way to beat this is to buy organic food. That way we know that children are safe. The fact is, the evidence shows that within 4 days of eating organic food, these pesticides leave our bodies, leave our children's bodies. And that is the best way to minimize the risk. And I want to say this clearly. Organic food is the way to ensure our health. Thank you.